Good morning. How is everyone? Thank you for being here with me today. I want to do that. Okay. I guess you're there. I'm not seeing. They've changed the setup, so I can't see who's there. But that's okay. That's all right. Precepts incense, samadhi incense, wisdom incense, liberation incense, cloud of lighted incense, pouring into the Dharma realms, offering to the highest teachers of the 10 directions. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud Bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud Bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud Bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to all directions of space, all realms, past, present, and future, all Buddhas, the honored Dharma, the enlightened Sangha, the permanent three treasures. I respectfully bow to our own teacher, Sakyamuni Buddha, the future born Maitreya Buddha, great wisdom, Manjushri Bodhisattva, great practice, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, Dharma protector Bodhisattvas, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas assembled at the great holy mountain. I respectfully bow to the great love, great compassion, Amitabha Buddha of the Western Paradise, great compassion, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, great Valk, Siddhigarbha Bodhisattva, great power, Mahastamaprada Bodhisattva, all the Bodhisattvas in the great pure ocean. Pull a little closer so we can chat. So glad to see so many of you here today. Move over so you can see the Buddha. Buddha's more important than I am. So tomorrow is Labor Day. It's officially the Labor Day weekend, in case you didn't know that. Labor Day was actually a creation of the labor movement as it started in the 1880s. And it started out, Labor Day started out as kind of a regional celebration that went state by state. Different states celebrated it. And then in 1894, it became a national holiday. And so it's dedicated to the social and economic achievements of the American worker. So essentially, it's an annual tribute to the contributions that workers have made to the strength and prosperity and well-being of the country, basically. I was thinking about that, and it seems particularly important to me this year. We have this term, essential workers. And in a lot of cases, you think about the people who've had to go to work and not been able to work remotely or shelter at home and all that have been these essential workers. In a lot of cases, these are the lowest paying jobs. And yet, when things started shutting down, people were being told to stay home. The essential workers had to go to work anyway, despite the fact that, some of them got paid the least. So you think about like the people who unload trucks at the grocery store. I've unloaded trucks for a living. That was one of my first jobs, not at a grocery store, but at an office supply store. And that's entry level stuff. That's kind of where you start out, back in the warehouse unloading things. But those people, you can't really do without. The people who pick up the garbage, that's not a very good paying job, I don't imagine. bus drivers and things like that, the guy who mops the floor in the hospital. We think about the doctors and nurses, but custodians and people like that, the people who staff the pharmacy counter. These are all essential. I was talking to somebody about this last week, and if they didn't show up, we would notice right away. If you went to the grocery store and there was nothing on the shelf, if your trash stayed out front of your house when you put it out there, you would notice that pretty quickly. But if all the stockbrokers and investment bankers disappeared overnight, it'd take a while, really, before most of us noticed they were gone, right? So, and look, if you're a stockbroker or an investment banker, don't take this personally, because truth is, I could disappear, and except for the people who show up on YouTube to watch me on live, probably most people wouldn't notice that I was gone either. So essential means different things in different contexts. And so anyway, it used to be that all the labor force basically got the day off on Monday. That was pretty universal. It's probably not as universal anymore. There's probably a lot of people at the grocery store tomorrow morning, and at Walmart and places like that are open on Labor Day. So labor is laboring on Labor Day. But I hope that most of them get the day off tomorrow. If you're labor, I hope you have the day off tomorrow. And if not, I hope you take a little bit of time out of your day tomorrow to acknowledge the essential workers, the people that make it possible for you to live your life. But anyway, I want to talk about the concept of labor, and specifically in Buddhist terms, the idea of right livelihood. So a lot of people come to Buddhism wanting special practices like meditation and things like that to lead to spiritual freedom. And that's great. Those things are important. I meditate every day, going to services, even online, that's a meritorious thing. That's a good thing to do. Reciting sutras, these are all good. They help us train the mind and the heart to guide us along the spiritual path. But there's more to living the spiritual life than just going to religious services on Sunday. Your life is your spiritual path. And so our relationships to one another, and even the seemingly mundane tasks like washing the dishes, mowing the lawn, and things like that, are part of the spiritual life. It's interesting. I've told people on a couple of these calls that if you send me for a donation for at least enough to pay for the shipping, I'll send you a book, right? So I've been going through the books that I want to get rid of, and I came across one that I hadn't read, and it was by a Chinese fellow named Venerable Master Chen Kung, who I think he's in Australia, and he's set up temples in places like Australia and New Zealand and stuff. And I kind of started leafing through it because I realized I hadn't read this one, and it's interesting. For one thing, it's giving me a lot of context for how some of the things that we do at White Sands Buddhist Center, for example, ended up being a part of Buddhism, and kind of how the different Mahayana sutras figure into the big picture and stuff. And he's an interesting guy. And there's one whole section on how taking care of your house and going to work and things like that can be a part of your spiritual practice, just by practicing, if you think about what the perfections are, the things like diligence and mindfulness and that kind of stuff, you practice those things in day-to-day life. It doesn't do you a lot of good just to do that stuff when you're sitting on a cushion or in front of a Buddha. You got to do those things when you're living your life. So your life is, if you want to talk about your spiritual life, it should include everything. The idea of continuous practice means whatever you're doing is part of your practice. So, and if you're a monk or a minister, that's pretty easy to see, but it can be a lot less obvious and make it maybe seem harder to live spiritually when you have to deal with things like mortgages and a job. But the Buddhist path is a comprehensive spiritual program. And the Buddha advised everyone, not just monks. He meant for people who have to go to work every day to be able to realize the fruits of spiritual practice also. So the fifth factor of the Eightfold Path is right livelihood. And I think most of us think of livelihood in terms of our career, or at least our job, what we do to pay the bills. But if we look deeper into that, the idea kind of starts to expand a lot. I think we can see livelihood to include a lot of things besides whether we consider ourselves a fireman or a farmer or a truck driver or whatever. The word livelihood, I think we can say, refers to our way of life. It's our means of securing the necessities of living, things like food and water and shelter and clothing. But social scientists who study these things actually think of that a little bit more broadly. It's that set of activities that enable us to survive and hopefully to thrive in our lives over a period of time. And that involves getting the requisites, but also things like healthcare and the things that we need in order to be able to do our jobs. You know, if you're a farmer, you need farm equipment. If you're, pretty much anybody else, you need a computer these days. Farmers probably need computers too. I haven't been a farmer in quite a while. I worked as a farmer for about 3 years, as growing indoor foliage. It was kind of fun. Hard work, very hard work. Livelihood then kind of expands to include what we do in order to afford what we need in order to support a household on a sustainable basis with some degree of dignity and within the context of society. So our livelihood is interconnected with the livelihoods of others, and it's dependent on the availability of the resources that our jobs require. You can see where it's getting dark in here. Turn on some light. So, for instance, during the Dust Bowl that occurred in the U.S. during the 1930s, a lot of farmers lost their livelihoods because their fields literally blew away. The soil wouldn't support crops anymore. But you don't have to look at something catastrophic like that to see how interdependent our livelihoods are with the context in which we live. So think about someone like Dr. Chow, our friend at White Sands Buddhist Center. He's a very highly regarded physician, and he's a very good doctor. But he wouldn't be a very successful doctor if there weren't things like roads for his patients to travel on, or if nobody had any money or health insurance to pay for doctors and that kind of stuff. So in order to do your job well, you need to have it in a context that enables that. So whether he was instructing a monk or a householder, the Buddhist teachings were based on the same foundation, the middle way, the Noble Eightfold Path. That those instructions that he laid out in his first teaching at Deer Park after his enlightenment. And so the first part of the Eightfold Path, the Buddha says to cultivate right view and right intention. In other words, to see how our beliefs lead to suffering or happiness, and then resolve to do the things that lead to happiness and let go of the things that lead to suffering. And then in the second part of the path, he talked about right speech, right action, and right livelihood. In other words, and this means to live in a way that's compassionate and that causes minimal amount of harm, minimal amount of impact on the world around you. And finally, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration to train our minds to keep us on the path, to keep us going in the right direction. So right livelihood fits into the second part of the path where the focus is on living compassionately, living responsibly relative to the rest of society. None of the factors of the Eightfold Path really stand alone. You can't go out and just practice right livelihood, or just practice right effort even, or just practice right mindfulness. They're all interrelated. You need to bring right view in order to understand whether livelihood is right or not. Is it, to be able to discern clearly, is this creating suffering for myself? Is it creating suffering for others? Or is it being supportive and toward my well-being and the well-being of others? and then deciding, based on the answers to those questions, whether or not to keep doing this. So you need right effort then to abandon wrong livelihood. If you suddenly realized that what you were doing created a really bad impact on the world around you, you'd have to put some effort into changing that. And so, in entering into right livelihood, you need right mindfulness to be able to see what's going on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, whether right livelihood is compassion or not. So it's all interrelated, interconnected. The Buddha mostly leaves it up to us to figure out what sort of occupation is right livelihood. To his credit, he didn't say, okay, here's the list of things that you can do. There are, there are religious traditions where they talk about those kinds of things for certain kinds of people. If you're a monk, for example, you can make money in certain ways to support yourself and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, the Buddha said, keep in mind your commitment to avoid harming yourself and others in body, speech, or mind. Take that into account when you're living your life. So there's no set of commandments to follow. But when we commit to a path, we set our minds on developing virtues like generosity, and we formally accept training rules to refrain from harming other beings and stealing and harmful speech, harmful sexual behavior, and compromising our minds with intoxicants and things like that. And so generally with right livelihood, you should be able to do your job without deviating from those vows. The Buddha did give some specific examples of wrong livelihood: trading in weapons or slaves, raising animals for slaughter, creating and selling intoxicants or poison, things like that. He said those were wrong livelihood, and that might have been a pretty complete list 2,600 years ago. But you have to use your judgment about things like that. So a doctor prescribes antibiotics. Well, if you're a bacteria, antibiotic is poison, right? But the doctor's intention is to preserve life, not to kill things. And so that's still right livelihood. There's a couple of stories where the Buddha talks about this, and he sort of explains the importance of mindfulness and kind of intention as you go about your life. And in one, there's an actor named Talaputta who's the head of a troupe of actors. And he comes to the Buddha and he sits down and he says, according to the ancient teaching lineage of actors, when an actor on stage makes people laugh and gives them delight, then after death, he's reborn in the company of laughing devas. In other words, it would be like a heaven where people laugh with you. You laugh, they laugh, everybody laughs together. And he says, what do you say about that? Well, the Buddha tries not to answer him. At first, he just said, don't ask me a question like that. This is what the Buddha would do if he knew that someone wasn't going to like the answer he was going to give them. So I try to do this sometimes too. Sometimes someone will ask me a question and I kind of go out of my way to not answer it. And it's usually because I know they're not going to like what I'm going to answer. But Talaputta asks again and then again. And so the rule was if you ask 3 times, you get an answer. So the Buddha finally says, okay, since you keep asking me this question, I'll answer you. And then he says, if an actor sets his mind on inflaming the passions, the angers, and delusions of people whose minds are already impassioned, angry, and deluded, then he'll be reborn in a hell of laughter. Whereas this would be a place where everybody laughs at you, not with you, okay, which would be a very unpleasant place to be. And he has a similar exchange with the leader of an army who asks if warriors who die in battle are reborn in a special heaven. And again, he kind of tries not to answer, but then he finally does. And he says, if you go about your life with your intention set on harming others, then that's not going to end well for you, basically. So he wasn't saying, don't be an actor or don't be a military person. He didn't, he actually advised kings to have armies and things like that. And theater actually comes out of religious traditions, and so it's not a terrible thing to be an actor, but think about what you're doing and what intentions are behind what you're doing. And he says, consider what he says about livelihood and its relationship to views and to mindfulness. If you're going to your job intent on causing harm or unmindful about the harm that you're causing, then that's not going to have a good effect on your mind. And the mind is where heavens and hells are created, right? Heaven's not a place, hell's not a place. These are states of mind in which you can end up, right? If you practice with your mind, developing the intentions to cause harm, developing the intention of getting people stirred up and angry. It's an election year, right? You see this a lot. There's a lot of people out there generating what I would think would be a lot of negative karma by really playing on people's angers and fears and stuff and delusions. And so, it's not up to me to say where they're going to go, but they're definitely harming their minds in the process of doing this. And they're harming society in the process of doing that too, because they're encouraging others to be delusional, which is why this is especially negative karma. If you're including someone else to be deluded, if you're taking someone who's hateful and asking them to be more hateful, giving them more reasons to hate, and that kind of stuff, then that's very, very negative karma. So if doing your job involves trading on people's tendency to make fun of other people or to engage in revenge fantasies and things like that, it's going to have harmful karmic consequences. You'll harm others, but in the meantime, you're damaging your own mind. And this is really, well, they're both important. But even if you don't maybe see the effect that your actions have on society, understand that those actions have a very negative effect on your own mind, make it hard for you to concentrate, hard for you to be compassionate, hard for you to have serenity, which means, it's going to be hard for you to live a meaningful spiritual life. So the Buddha also said we should be honest in our dealings. We shouldn't have to use trickery, cajolery, or deceit or hide our true motives. That's the way he put it. So your work life shouldn't be characterized by that, nor should it be characterized by what he called rapacity for gain upon gain. In other words, don't just try to amass wealth in order to amass wealth. Think about the good that it can do. So right livelihood should have a higher purpose than just to pile up masses of money for its own sake. It doesn't mean you have to be poor. The Buddha encouraged lay persons to make money, to accumulate wealth, and to not squander it. But right livelihood also would include using it wisely. We were talking about this Thursday in the Zoom study group. There was a story from one of the backstories from the Dhammapada about a woman who had been very wealthy in many lives. And she was also very charitable in these lives. It went back to beginningless time, beyond this universe existed. This had been a person who was consistently privileged and charitable. And the Buddha pointed out that as a layperson, you can do an awful lot of good with the wealth that you have by sharing it and by directing it into productive, constructive ways that help others. He said, to be careful not to squander your money. We should use it to care for ourselves and our spouse and family, and then helping out friends and relatives and the needy and the spiritual community. So somebody asked me once, if I thought the Buddha, kind of the first teaching is the importance of dana, of giving. And the reason for this is because if you can't let go of stuff, it's going to be really hard to make any progress in Buddhism. But this person asked me, do you think that was because, it was helpful to the Buddha and his monks to tell people to give? And sure, I'm sure it was. It's helpful to the Buddha and his monks and other ascetics and Brahmins and so on to encourage generosity. But when he talked about the places that gifts do good and that wealth is useful, he put that at the very bottom of the list. Take care of yourself, your spouse, the rest of your family, your friends, the needy, and then the spiritual community. So, but it would also encourage people to be good to their labor, right? You can't be a king or a wealthy merchant or whatever if he's working for you and helping you with that. And so he encouraged people to treat them well, to acknowledge that. And so even back then, he said employers should look after the health care of their employees. And this was way before there was medical insurance, but he said you should look after their health care, make sure they have enough to eat, make sure that they're assigned tasks based on their ability to perform them, and that they're compensated for the work that they do, which that's a really interesting way of looking at things. It was kind of capitalistic, I guess, but aside from each according to his ability, and then make sure that they're compensated on the value of what they do. So our lives, are very complicated today. The world is very complicated. We're very interdependent. We have to be so careful about how our life interacts with and impacts the life of other people and other beings, the world that we live in. So, that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind as we're living our lives. We can't be perfect, but we can definitely think about how we're using resources, not just at work, but in our lifestyles as well. Throwing away some coffee grounds and a coffee filter versus throwing away a plastic cup, that sort of thing. I mean, take those things into account. This is part of right livelihood. Make the choices that will support the world. There's a concept now called sustainable livelihood that I think would be very in line with Buddhism and the idea of right livelihood. And the idea is that we should find ways to live that have everything that's needed to be sustained and to recover from stress and shock. We think about what it means to be spiritually healthy. It doesn't mean that nothing bad is ever going to happen to you because you're a Buddhist or whatever. It means that when something bad happens to you, you have the resiliency to be able to recover from it. And if we're looking at our livelihoods and its effect on the world, and we want to stay within this area, that the world can recover from our being here. If we tried to make that our goal, that wouldn't be a bad way of looking at this. So, and our livelihood, part of that is to make sure that what we do benefits other people at the local level, global level, hopefully, over the short term and over the long term. And so, a lot of Buddhists make things like volunteer work and charitable giving and environmental preservation and things like that a part of their practice. And I think that that's a really good idea. And I'm very happy to see people create lifestyles that recognize the web of interdependency. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk to you about today on Labor Day weekend. Think about the rightness of your labor. So I hope that was helpful to you. Has anybody got any questions that you want to post before we call it a morning and go on about our afternoon? Okay, I don't see any. So we'll do the dedication, and if something pops up while we're doing this, we'll deal with it. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now. In offering flowers, candles, and incense, hearing the Dharma and training the mind, great merit is attained. We dedicate this merit to the great Master Shakyamuni Buddha, the all-pervading and everlasting three treasures, to the 16 guardians and all protectors of the Dharma and their relations throughout space and time, to all ancestors of this Sangha and all beings in the Dharma world. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance. Let all karma be resolved and the mind flower bloom in eternal spring. May the Dharma body maintain strength and health, and years of life be lengthened for all teachers of this Sangha. May their vows be fully realized, and may they live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma. We pray for those suffering from violence, those who grieve for them, for those living in oppression, for all who are imprisoned who should be free, for all refugees from violence, hunger, and catastrophe, man-made or natural. We pray for the health and well-being of those suffering from diseases of body, mind, or spirit, and those ministering to those afflictions. We pray for those suffering from COVID-19, those protecting them and treating them, and to those grieving for those lost to this pandemic. May they be serene through all their troubles, and may we realize the enlightened way together. So thank you for being here. If you're not here and you watch later, thank you for doing that. Hope to see you, or you will see me probably Wednesday night or Thursday or next Sunday. So again, thank you very much. I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend.